welcome back to the WTF Sunderland podcast for another special episode as the club announce yet another signing, or at least to get close to. If reports are to be believed, Getafe and Paraguay centre-back Omar Alderete is said to be our first centre-back signing of the summer, and we're all desperate to find out a little bit more about the 28-year-old ahead of the big man's arrival on Wearside. I can't claim in any way to be an expert on the player himself or Paraguayan football, but one man is, working for the likes of ESPN and Low Limit Football. It's Roberto Rojas to join us to give us a lowdown on our latest, hopefully, buy. But first and foremost, Roberto, how are you, mate? You okay?
I'm good, Graham. I'm good. Glad to be on here. And yeah, happy to talk about a player that am very much happy that he's able to get his move to the Premier League. Mind you, I did not expect him to make this move to Sunderland, but nevertheless, I am here to obviously give the lowdown on what to expect from Omar. Yeah.
So, look, he looks like he's going to be our next signing. I think you're starting to get the here he goes and all the things that happen these days. So, before we discuss what kind of player he is, like, how excited should Sunderland fans be about the signing? Because we need centre-backs, and he's our first centre-back signing of the summer.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think for what it takes, I think for someone like him to make this move to the Premier League, I think is important. I think this is someone that's had the experience already playing in a top five league for the last, I want to say now 5 years, because, he left South America very young. He was actually in Basel, in Switzerland, and actually put up really good numbers before making a move to Hertha Berlin in the Bundesliga. Was decent around there. Then he made this move to Spain where he played for the likes of Valencia, now obviously at Getafe. So he's been very consistent, probably the most consistent Paraguayan player in Europe. And this is crazy considering we've had the likes of Miguel Miron, who's at Newcastle, Julio Enciso, who's at Brighton, Antonio Sanabria, who played at Torino. He was a striker there in Serie A for quite some time. But I genuinely think that for Omar's sake, that he's the one that kind of is waving the flag in the best way for South America, for Paraguayans in Europe. And, you can obviously, we'll talk about his numbers and kind of what he's been able to do. But I think Sunderland fans can be very excited, honestly. I think this is someone that has obviously have bags of experience playing in a top league like La Liga, and obviously beforehand, and obviously is a proven international, always starting for a Paraguay team that, is set to qualify for the World Cup, their first World Cup in 16 years, coming in a grueling South American campaign, getting wins against Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and he's been so important in that defense, which, is such a key virtue in Paraguay as a whole. Paraguayan football has been known for obviously producing really good players, but what their standard is and what kind of player that, the style of play that they're able to do has always been very ultra defensive, park the bus, play on the counter. So Omar is kind of someone that kind of embodies that and has demonstrated that over this campaign and also beforehand when Paraguay have not been so good. But yeah, I think some of the fans could be very excited. I think, certainly, when he does make that first step at the Stadium of Light and obviously, playing for Sunderland, and, obviously the task at hand is going to be very difficult. But again, this is someone that's dealt with these sort of situations of, relegation races to not go down and whatnot. So, him proving that sort of sense and allowing himself to be in this new challenge, I think is very exciting. And again, it's very nice to see another Paraguayan in the Premier League. The fact that we've had quite a few in the last few years, and of course, another one at Sunderland, going off on some history as well with Paraguayans in Sunderland. So again, history just repeats itself again.
You're touching it there. He's our third Paraguayan to play. Those who are, I'm starting to feel a bit old here, but Paulo da Silva, Christian Riveros, both played for us previously at the same time. But when you look at his career, he's had experience in the Swiss league, but then he's improved and gone to the Bundesliga with Hertha. Then he's played in La Liga, as you said, for Valencia, and then he's played also for Getafe more prominently over the past few years. Does it feel like the next natural step for him to be going into the Premier League? And does his style of play, from what you've seen, suit what he's likely to get in the Premier League?
I think so. And I'm really actually surprised that it happened so, I don't want to say late in his career because he's still very much a player in his prime. He turns 29 in December. So, you think to yourself, okay, is he ever going to make a big move to the Premier League? And he's been linked to various clubs, and, a lot of people in Paraguay, be it in the media or those close to him, were always wondering, like, this guy's been so good, for quite some time. Why on earth has no one from like the Premier League or a big team in La Liga been able to get him? So yeah, I think it's certainly such a long time coming. And I think for him to make that move and the way that he plays, we'll talk about that again, like in a second, but I think it's very suited of a player of his style to play in the Premier League just because of the way he plays and how he really acts as himself. I think it's well worth it. So I'm really happy to see that. And again, I think following the footsteps of, players like Pablo da Silva, for example, who I'm sure he's seen, as a youth player or, and been able to learn from him as well. I'm sure there is some inspiration. I'm sure he's even spoken to him in regards to like, this move and what to expect of the Premier League. And, obviously he's had a lot of teammates that's played there as well. So I'm sure I think it's going to be interesting to see how he performs over there at Sunderland.
Got a nickname, and I'm going to absolutely butcher this, by the way. He's got the third most clearances per 90 in La Liga last season, and he's built the nickname the Guarani Wall. I've pronounced that wrong, but what does it mean? Because it's got a Paraguayan element to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. He's someone that I think has been so, very no nonsense. I think he's someone that is your very atypical Paraguayan defender, is that someone that, means business and is always trying to be, I don't want to say the center of attention, but certainly someone that, understands that, when the going gets tough, that he's there to help out. He's there to be the last line of defense. He really has been able to demonstrate that, be it at club level or international level. And you see some of the numbers that he's been able to produce. He's very good with, tackling and clearances. He's very good in the air. I think what is it, like 87% percentile or something like that in all the center backs of all the top five leagues. So, he's very good. He's very good at winning challenges. I think one of the things that, and he's also, and as crazy as it sounds, he also loves a goal. He can do that. Sometimes we've seen that, I've had the fortune of being at a few Paraguay games where he's been able to score goals in two ways. One from long distance. This was in a game against Brazil at the Copa America last year, which Paraguay unfortunately lost, but he was able to shoot from distance and also from a set piece. Him being able to win the ball in the air. That's such a Paraguayan thing, as we say here, is that the way that Paraguay wins games is winning with a cross and a goal in the air. It's something that we do. So I think he's going to be very important when it comes to corner kicks and set pieces and, all those type of things. But I think just in general, I think the way that you want your defender to obviously, with someone like him being able to go against the likes of, Mo Salah or Erling Haaland or Alexander Isak or whoever, those certain players, I think for him, he understands his responsibility. Like, no, these guys are not going to get past me, or at least that's the expectation, because he's already dealt with that in, La Liga, playing against the best players in the world over there. And he's done it in Germany as well. So he understands this sort of responsibility. And of course, playing against internationals over there in South America. So I think that's what to expect from him on my perspective. And, I think obviously for me, one of the things that I think he should obviously improve on is because, in this sort of game of modern football that you want your defenders to be ball playing defenders, want to obviously, sort of help out the midfield or help out an attack. Again, he could be a left back if needed as well. So, he had those sort of references of being able to play both sides of the defense. So I think he's someone that can definitely, obviously, and rightly so, in such a situation like this where, Sunderland are trying to obviously stay up after getting promoted. And I think that they try to understand that, for him, I think it's a huge responsibility, because I think him trying to stop, the best attackers in the world over there in the Premier League, I think is going to be huge. I think it's going to be big for him. And I think he kind of understands this responsibility. So I think that's what Sunderland fans are going to expect. I think you're going to expect a player that is very no nonsense, that has been so consistent for his club, for his country. I think can obviously improve of, moving forward when necessary. But when in terms of like take-ons and clearances and interceptions, tackles, those sort of things, and winning well in the air, I think he would be very much suited for that level. And I think he's certainly someone that can help out a Sunderland team that, like you said, desperately needed a center back. And, it's going to be interesting to see who's going to be paired with in that center back role. But I think he's someone that I'm very excited for. And I'm actually happy that he made this move finally to the Premier League.
It's interesting that you mentioned about his goal scoring, because look, he doesn't get 10 goals a season. That's not what we're saying. But when he scores, he gets big goals. He scored, I think, one of the goals in a winner against Real Madrid for Getafe, I think, recently. Also scored the winner against Argentina quite recently as well, I believe, or scored against Argentina in a big game.
Yep.
I think when it comes to next season, because look, I want to believe that this is not going to be the case, but there will be points when Sunderland are maybe more soaking up pressure and trying to hit on the brakes. So set pieces, when we get them, are going to be massive. We've got Dan Ballard, who's likely to partner him originally, at least. He's a big threat from set pieces, but how big of a threat is he in the opposition box? Because it seems like he's got a real knack for popping up and scoring a goal in the other net, as opposed to just keeping it out of ours.
Yeah, no, he's not someone that makes a lot of mistakes either. I think that's certainly something that I think has impressed me as well, because a lot of defenders obviously have mishaps and whatnot. But I think what I've really enjoyed about him is that he's not someone that has been able to make those kind of mistakes. And I think, in a situation like this, and he's already dealt with it when he was at Getafe and, obviously playing for teams that are obviously fighting not to go down. I think he kind of understands that these teams that are a bit more gritty, so that's when he has to obviously demonstrate a bit more of being able to, play when necessary. Like, I'm not saying that this could happen, but this could obviously be a situation where, they're on the break, they get a goal from a corner or whatever, and he's able to score it, and then he has to go defend for 80 plus minutes or whatnot and just try to park the bus against, those teams that you expect to get results too. I mean, against the likes of a City or a Liverpool or Arsenal, I think that's going to be much more difficult. But, I think him being able to demonstrate it in those games that where you are able to get points, your Leeds, your Burnleys, your Brentfords, those kind of games. I think that's where, he can be a bit more sort of out there in comparison to, those other big games. I'm curious to see what Regis Labris thinks of him and, how he's going to be able to use him, because I think certainly something, he was a defender as well as a player. So I'm sure he has sort of that guidance of what works best for him and, obviously what he's been able to see that and, just the way that they play. I think it's always going to be sort of those gritty games. So I am going to be intrigued of how he's going to be perceived. And, ultimately, I think he's with pressure from the get-go, just because he comes to a team that obviously are trying to, obviously not get relegated and to have a good start. And, the fact that I haven't been in the Premier League in quite some time, I think they want to really make a good impression. And I think they understand that they paid, 11 million or something like that. They understand that the responsibility there is huge. So, yeah, I think I'm intrigued to see how he does from the get-go. I think the first game against West Ham is going to be very much a good step for him and see how he's been able to perform. But I think I'm confident enough to say that I think he can do well enough in that defense, just because of the consistency that he's been able to prove, already in Spain and in Germany and, obviously for the national team. I think it will help a lot for him. And I think it's just, him hopefully being sort of a cult hero, I guess. I know you had the likes of Da Silva and Riveros who, had their stints there, but maybe wasn't as flashy in comparison to Alderete. I hope that with Alderete's sake that I mean, look, if he helps Sunderland not get relegated and they stay up, I mean, that changes everything, does it?
Yeah, 100. If he does that, then he's fine. I think one, I can't say this is all him because look, it's a team sport. We know that without kind of being too cliched. And there's four, three, or five, or whoever it may be in defence. But if you look at the La Liga table last season, Getafe are one of those teams that are going to be battling to stay up. Like at the best case scenario, you're hoping like the lower top half maybe. And I hope I'm not offending Getafe fans by saying that, but I'm also sure none of them are really listening to me. But if you look at the bottom of the league, you've got Valladolid conceded 90 goals. Las Palmas conceded 61. Leganes conceded 56. That was the bottom three that went down. Then you've got Sevilla, Girona, Alaves, Espanyol, Valencia, Real Sociedad, Mallorca. That's your bottom 10. All of them conceded more goals last season than Getafe did, who finished 13th. How big of a focal point did he have towards that, shall we say, good defensive record in comparison to, how big of an influence did he have on that? Is basically what I'm saying, I guess.
No, it was big. Certainly I think the way that Getafe have been playing a lot of those games, you look at some of the results that they've been able to you get. I mean, they haven't been blown out tremendously. There had been some exceptions, but you look at I think around the last time, like, Getafe, they were always gonna be safe, I think around April-ish. So I think they only won one game out of the last 7 or 8, I have to say. But, they were very much, tight games, 1-0, 2-1, that sort of thing. And they were able to, start off afresh and, be able to get those sort of results. I think he even got a result against Barcelona as well. So, no, I think he's had a really good impact on that defensive record. Obviously, when you are a team that, have only been able to concede, was it 39 goals or something like that last season, which is actually really good when you think about it, that they conceded the same amount of goals as Barcelona, who won the La Liga. So, the fact that they've been having a good, in that case, defensive record, I think Alderete had a huge vocal point on that for sure, because, I think if he wasn't in that team, and I'm curious to see how Getafe are going to do without him, but I think his sort of role on that team was helped tremendously on how, they've been able to stay afloat consistently, in La Liga. Obviously, I think his performances have allowed them to feel safe. That again, they didn't make that big push to obviously qualify for a European competition, but still, the fact that he's been able to help a Getafe team that I think obviously their ceiling is to stay mid-table and of course achieve what they can do domestically. But I think that had a huge, I'm sure Omar had a huge, importance in that. And I think he's going to look at sort of those things when you go into early in the season. That of course, I think Sunderland want to don't want to be in a situation to come April or March where they are still desperately trying to fight for points and try to be in a position where it's like, man, we gotta get these results to try to stay up. Like I think for him from the get-go, it's like, right, at least him thinking is like, right, I need to get a good defensive record where we're able to, because goal difference is going to be a big factor as well. I think in these relegation races, like that's going to be huge. That where a lot of these teams are going to, obviously get a lot of points. So it all goes down to goal difference as well. That obviously in a perfect world, you want Sunderland to obviously be in the position where they don't have to worry about relegation, that they're comfortably with, the threshold is what 40 points. So if they're able to get that at a focal point of the season where it's like, right, we're good, and Omar is a big factor in that, then you're going to see sort of the reasons as to why he did that with Getafe. It's like, okay, yeah, he can do that in Spain and he can do it in the Premier League. So I think that's sort of the expectation, and I think that's sort of his plan overall. If I'm thinking as him, is like try to help that defense, try not to concede as much, and try to snatch a goal or a result or whatever. If it's by getting 0-0s in these big games, like you said, against your Arsenals or your Man Cities, and then trying to snatch those like breakaway 1-0, 2-1 game wins against like your Brentfords, your Burnleys, and so on. So be it. That's the way to
Yeah.
do it. So
Sounds
yeah,
ideal to me. I take it. As long as it's
exactly.
against a particular team as well at one point in the season, that would be great.
Oh man,
Uh,
yeah. Can you believe that? Can you imagine that him being the winner in that sort of derby?
talking about cult heroes, if he's listening and he wants to be a cult hero, that's a really good way to start, mate. But what's interesting is, look, Sunderland spent a lot of money this summer, and I don't think I've ever known Sunderland spend this much money. But I think it's a combination of how much money is now in the Premier League, how much has changed since we were last there, and also football, for rightly or wrong reasons, has gone just a bit mental and a bit mad, and money is just like, even the most average of players costs about 20 million these days. But I've seen the stats, I've seen who he played for, seen how well he was rated from the outside looking in without actually watching anything about it. And then I've seen 12 million euro with 30, a million add on, like 30 million euros. Does it represent, especially in this market, really good value for Sunderland? Because it feels, for the Premier League, quite low.
Yeah, and especially for his age, the fact that he turns 29 this year. So, you're not getting someone that is rightly that expensive as well. If this was someone that I think was like maybe 5 years younger, I think that would have maybe increased double, maybe triple. So I think it's very much a case of like, all right, it's low risk that, okay, if they go down, then, it's not that big of a loss in comparison to getting someone that was worth, I don't know, 35 or 40 or whatever. So, I think for his sake, I mean, think about it, you're getting someone that has been consistent as a center back in La Liga for quite some time, is an international for a good South American country that's going to play in the World Cup next year. A starter, obviously. And yeah, I think it's good money, honestly. Like I think that hopefully by this time, at the end of the next season, that obviously if Sunderland are in a good position where they're not obviously relegated, they're comfortably in a position like, I don't know, they finished 14th, let's say, just throwing a ballpark number out there. Then they look back at that, it's like, oh, it was a bargain. Like, because if he was so important that, his value can increase now, but the fact that they were able to get him and for his age, like again, I'm not here to say that, you know, this is his peak, that this is where he's plateau and that's just going to get worse as he get older. I don't know. I can't say that, but at least he's demonstrated enough that, for the money that he was able to get, that they were able to get him, that at least it wasn't like, at the worst case scenario. If the worst case scenario is that, it didn't work, he failed, at least it wasn't that big of a loss. So no, I think it's a positive outlook to look at it in terms of money, whichever way it ends, I think.
Looking at the team itself, the final question I sort of wanted to ask, because it's all been positive and I'm loving this, to be honest. It's all great. Can only go down from here, can't it, Roberto? But looking at Paraguay's team, I think you're right in what you're saying. Look, there's the Brazils, and you have like your Uruguay to a lesser extent, maybe, and your Argentinas. They're the teams that are seen as like the big teams. But underneath that, you probably have like a Paraguay.
Hmm.
we've consistently seen them qualifying for big tournaments over the years. You look at the team, there's players that you recognise, the teams that you know. Almiron's obviously one of the names that sticks out for maybe for more obvious reasons for us, but you've also got the two boys from Brighton. You've got Gomez, you've got Enciso. Where does Alderete place in, like, if you were to make like a top five Paraguayan players in the national team at the moment, where's he placing at the moment in his importance to the national team?
Oh, he's right up there. He's top tier. Yeah, I would probably say that at the minute, like just assessing the entire process, I would say he's, definitely top three. Certainly, I think his importance in a lot of these games has been down to him. Again, he's not the one, and he's gotten goals too. You have to realize like he's gotten goals for this team, but in terms of top tier, like he's up there in terms of importance. I think without Alderete, I think Paraguay would be in a very different position than they are right now. And of course, the likes of Enciso and Almiron, they're always going to have those different makers. But in terms of like how they're able to, keep, like I said, last line of defense, being able to win those challenges and be able to be sort of no nonsense in those big games against your Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia, etc. He's right up there. He's super important. I think he's got the taking of being a future captain. The other guy, Gustavo Gomez, he's 32, so there is a bit of an age difference there. But I think once he's is done, I think Omar can easily take that the captaincy from him. After the World Cup or whatever. I think his importance on that team has been tremendous. Like, the fact that I think him, the likes of Almiron and Ciso and all those guys, I think have been so vital for this team. And I'm really happy that they've been able to do that because, a lot of these players haven't been able to go to a World Cup. They've never done that. They haven't seen their country in a World Cup in 16 years. So for Omar, I think the representation of him being one of those guys that have been able to help this team, like he wasn't a support player. He wasn't just someone that was behind the scenes. Like, no, he was actually vital for that, hopefully this time when the World Cup happens, that there's going to be a lot of people that maybe won't be familiar with him. And, when they take on the likes of, the big teams and he's able to perform, it's like, wait a minute, where was this, beforehand? Like, who are that? I'm not saying that he could be a hidden gem, and he shouldn't be because obviously he plays for a top team in the top league like he did at Getafe. Now he's doing it at Sunderland. So you have to be very familiar. But I think maybe for the casuals, they're going to see him and it's like, whoa, this guy actually is good because he's been able to demonstrate that. And that also goes back to like Sunderland and like, what are they doing? That sort of thing. So yeah, I think he's someone that's super important for Paraguay, and hopefully he can achieve that sort of importance of what he does at Sunderland because it's a vital season as well. Obviously for him, he's trying to stay healthy. He's obviously wants to help Paraguay qualify for the World Cup. They got the games in a couple of weeks. And obviously it's just him being in the best form possible. I think that's kind of why he made this move because he understood that with the World Cup happening next summer, that he wants to step himself up in a better league where, I'm sure he's going to play against similar opposition or similar style of opposition at the World Cup that I think he just wanted to better himself so that he can feel as if though he is ready enough to play for the country and take on the world, I guess, next summer here in North America.
I said that was my last question, but I'm going to give you one more. I feel like I'm doing this on regular episodes now, but this just shows my lack of being able to speak any other language apart from English. What's the correct pronunciation? If we were like Paraguayan and we were to say his name, what's the pronunciation? Which I'll never get right, but let's just get it on record anyway.
So I'll do it in the best Paraguayan Spanish that I could because, again, that's the Spanish I was taught from my parents because obviously that's where my parents are from. And the way that you pronounce it, Omar Alderete.
I'm never going to get that right, am I? But at
All
least
the
I've got it on
rest
record.
fine. You'll take it. And listen, if it's not, as long as you're able to pronounce it properly like that, just call him Big Omar, something like that.
Big Omar. Yeah, I like that.
Don
I
Omar.
can go with
Don
that.
Omar is like there's a reggaeton artist called Don Omar, so maybe you could take that nickname as well. So hey, whatever makes you happy, honestly.
I'm delighted with Don Omar. That works perfectly. But Roberto, nice to first meet originally, and thanks for all the really positive stuff. Because over the past few years, I suppose if I did this when we signed players in League One, it might not have been quite as positive. So I feel very good heading into the new season. But thanks very much for popping on. I'll put all your links and things underneath if people want to connect and ask any further questions. But really appreciate you being on, mate. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Graham. Really appreciate it.